Hi, I'm David Gregg, the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey. Spring has sprung. No frog sex yet, but soon. And it's a perfect time to think about our Plant Insect Community Network. It's a collaboration of 19 organizations throughout Rhode Island that are working on pollinator-adjacent projects, whether that's insects or native plants. The Plant Insect Community Network hosted a conference on March 7th, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Avalon Owens from the Rowland Institute at Harvard University. You're about to watch a recording of Dr. Owens' talk. If you like this video from the Plant Insect Community Network conference, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click the bell so that you get notified every time we post a new video. And don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps to drive the algorithm. Thanks for supporting the Natural History Survey. And see you out there.
I am so excited to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Avalon Owens. So Dr. Owens holds a Master of Science in Entomology from National Taiwan University and a PhD in Biology from Tufts University. She is now a research fellow at the Rowland Institute at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There you go, proof for you. And her research group studies the impact of light pollution on organisms and ecosystems with a focus on firefly conservation and moth evolution. This is something that isn't really heavily studied or studied really at all in Rhode Island, and so I thought that this was going to be an absolute wonderful opportunity for us to learn a little bit about the impact of artificial light at night on our insect populations. Other quick little fun note is that I read some of Avalon's papers in my insect ecology course in grad school. And so I was like, this seems really familiar. And then I was like, oh, I've read your papers before. So it's a great connection. So again, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Avalon Owens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for this opportunity. It's really exciting and special. So yes, my goal today is to raise awareness amongst all these beautiful people here about light pollution as an environmental threat, because there are many environmental threats out there. Light pollution is probably the least recognized of them, despite the fact that it's one of the most important. So we're awareness raising today, and I want to start with, this is Alewife Brook. This is right by my house. I like to go here on runs and over lunch, walk around, and I'll think to myself, what a beautiful oasis of pristine nature right in the middle of the city. And I think most people who come here have a similar sort of thought. It's gorgeous, lots of native plants, everybody seems really happy, and then most people will go home at night, close their curtains, and they'll never see what it looks like in the dark, where it's completely disturbed by light from these big glass biotech complexes on the borders of the reservation. So light pollution can be really hard to see. But once you start seeing it, you see it everywhere, not only in the middle of the city where you have lights from windows and street lights, but even in very beautiful remote rural areas. This is Lincoln, Massachusetts. We're at one of the sites where we do firefly surveys. And if you were inside that house looking out, you might think it was a beautiful, pristine, untouched wilderness, not realizing that your lights were completely transforming the habitat of these fireflies and the other insects that live there. So light pollution is something we rarely think about. Here's something else we rarely think about. Not insects. I know everyone here thinks about insects a lot, although when I give this talk in other places, we start with insects. But this is a splash image from this paper called Declines in Insect Abundance and Diversity, We Know Enough to Act Now. And I've picked it out as one of many examples of sort of mosaics meant to show incredible insect diversity. Something that I noticed immediately about this is that of all these insects shown, only 3 of them are reasonably nocturnal. We've got the firefly, the Luna moth, it's just suddenly got so nervous, and the stonefly, right? Correct me, yeah, okay. So I'm not gonna do the math, but that's a pretty small percentage of the whole. It might surprise you to learn that actually 60% of insects are nocturnal. Most insects are nocturnal, and we just don't think about them very much for the same reason. We go home at night, we leave our field station or our field site, we go home, we close the curtains, out of sight, out of mind. But nocturnal insects are super abundant, and they're also super important ecologically. In particular, they have a role as pollinators. So bees get a lot of credit. Butterflies get, I would argue, too much credit. And those among us who are really into pollinators are also probably pretty fond of hoverflies, but very few of us will think of moths as pollinators. However, they're doing a lot of flower visitation at night where nobody can appreciate it. Now, I'm not a plant person, full disclosure, but I am friends with many plant people. My friend Nick Dorian helped install this pollinator garden in my backyard. And we were sitting out there one day just thinking about plants, talking about pollinator plants, pollinator gardens. And he mentioned, many people here are probably familiar with this idea of pollination syndrome, which I'm not going to get into. I know it's controversial, but essentially that flowers sometimes look like the things that visit them. And the classic example is an orchid is very white and very fragrant, and white fragrant flowers are supposed to attract moths. And he mentioned to me, you know what's a white fragrant flower? Milkweed. And then I went out a couple days later and I saw this beautiful hawk moth visiting milkweed, and I thought, well, maybe there's something there. And then we both started to go out at night and look at our respective milkweeds, and we found all sorts of moths visiting them, and then visiting other plants nearby. This is a video that he took on bee balm, or monad. Yeah, that one. Thank you. And I really love this video because I think it makes you appreciate one beautiful thing about moths. They're very fuzzy and they are very buzzy. They beat their wings quite fast, and they're really down there in at the base of the flower, getting stuff all over themselves. Compare that to a butterfly. Like, what are we doing? It's so far away, you know. I think there's a lot there. It's something I've gotten into recently. And we've done a few surveys looking at blueberry at night, as well as other flowering berries and native plants, native flowering plants. We see lots of moths on blueberry. Strawberry as well, quite popular. And then on the right here, this is Joe Pye weed, and this is a long time lapse, so I'll kind of talk through it. This is infrared time lapse that we took over a 24-hour period. This is as the sun is setting, and it's a little hard to see right when the sun sets, but then we have an infrared light. And you might start to see a lot of things crawling around. In a second, we're going to start annotating them. These little boxes will pop up. But you can see there's all sorts of things happening. The nightlife is pretty good out in a person's garden, and it's really something I recommend getting into. If you want to get even more into moths, many of you here may be familiar with mothing. So this is a very fun sort of community event where if you go out and you set up a black light or other lights against a white sheet, you can attract moths and a bunch of other insects, and use this as a survey method and as just a fun way to hang out and spend your time. You'll see all sorts of incredible things. These are all moths that are fairly common in Massachusetts, right next door. And up close, in the right lighting, you can really appreciate how gorgeous they are, how many beautiful patterns and colors. And if you get really into it, I would heavily recommend two iNaturalist projects to you all. One, the Mass Moths Project has been running for a very long time. Pretty much every state and county record of a moth in Massachusetts, historical and modern, is contained either within this iNaturalist project or on their website. And then a more recent project started by my friend Adam Cole is documenting moths on flowers in the northeastern US. And I would really recommend going on there, having a stroll around, and you'll start to gain an appreciation for how common moth flower visitation is. So that, no more converting the converted, I think. I want to talk about insect declines. So insects are amazing. What if we don't see them as much as we used to? So this is probably the best data set on moth declines, which comes out of the Rothamsted Insect Survey in the UK, which has been running since 1968. And that has been enough time to see really steep declines in moth abundance. and diversity. And data sets like this, as well as several other kinds of long-term survey data, have come together within the past decade or decade and a half and created a sort of sense of a global insect apocalypse, that we seem to be seeing incredibly rapid declines in insect abundance and diversity in very different parts of the globe on around the same time scale within the past 30 to 40 years. And this has raised a lot of concerns, obviously. I don't need to go into them, but we need insects to live, and as entomologists, we need them in multiple ways to live, if you will. So what's going on here? Well, probably a lot of things, and this is one of the more well-known reviews of various threats to insects globally. You can see pictured urbanization, intensive agriculture, extreme climate events, but there are two things missing from this splash image. And this is a great paper. I don't mean to, but just raising awareness. Number one, no nocturnal insect is shown, despite the fact that 60% of insects are nocturnal. And also light pollution isn't mentioned. This is fairly common. I am used to this by now, although it still hurts. Light pollution just isn't really considered. And what I hope to convince you of today is that this is a huge blind spot that we all have. It's not because it's not important, it's because we're not seeing it, but we can start to see it and start to make some changes. So you might think, light pollution, sure, it's an issue in Providence, it's an issue in Boston, Massachusetts, New York City for sure. You might be surprised to learn that actually 23% of the habitable land surface of the Earth is unnaturally bright at night, to varying degrees. But an increasingly large percentage of habitats never reach complete darkness. And a lot of that light does originate in large urban centers, like Providence, like Boston, like New York, like San Francisco. You can see them all here. And that light can go up into the sky and get bounced around and diffused to form this haze that we call sky glow, which is visible very far away from the source. If you're in the middle of nowhere, you can often see cities on the horizon by the glow that they produce. But that is not to say that light pollution is an urban issue. It actually is statistically most common outside of cities in terms of land area, and also, I would argue, much more impactful outside of cities due to the contrast of the lights against the background. So I want to point out some examples of some rather extreme non-urban artificial light sources. We have the US-Mexico border wall, much of which is extremely brightly illuminated for miles and miles and miles. This is one I learned about recently, kind of fun, kind of not. Table Mountain in South Africa is lit up for aesthetic reasons. That's what it looks like to the animals that live there at night. And then increasingly these days, we're seeing a lot of greenhouses pop up in very rural areas that are lit 16 hours a day with these super bright LEDs that go up into the sky and create this incredible glow that's visible, again, for miles and miles and miles. It's not just very common, it's also becoming more and more common every year. And in fact, one of my favorite / least favorite statistics is within the past decade, the night sky, on average, globally, has become twice as bright. So if you were, as a kid, you could see about 250 stars in the sky at night. By the time you went to college, it would be less than 100 on average around the world. And that is largely due to advances in lighting technology that have enabled us to put lights everywhere. So to give you a sense of that, this is Boston Common at twilight. This painting is in the MFA in Boston. I just saw it a couple weekends ago in person. It was delightful. I love this painting because it shows us some historical lighting infrastructure. So around the edges of the park, you can see these gas lamps. There aren't very many of them. They're not all that bright, and they would not have been on all night because gas is very expensive, and these things also broke often. Contrast that to Boston Common at twilight today, and you can see truly, we put lights everywhere. Many of these are LEDs. They're cheap. They're extremely durable. In some cases, they're so cheap that it's easier to keep them on than to turn them off. because the cost of the switch, the electricity of the switch is considered, the installation of controls is too expensive, so people just leave them on. This is, in fact, sidebar, but since I'm here, this was a big issue in the Lincoln Public Schools, where they installed new LED lights in all of the classrooms, huge glass, new building, huge glass windows, and they just couldn't turn them off. And so, just couldn't turn them off. So, needless to say, things keep getting worse, and they could even get worse yet. I don't know who's heard about this. There's a startup called Reflect Orbital, which recently got $20 million of investor funding in support of the creation of a mega constellation of mirrored satellites that will reflect sunlight from the other half of the globe down onto cities and towns and solar farms at night, creating a sort of perpetual day. So this is their concept image. It would be, they claim to be able to illuminate a 5-mile square area to about brighter than a full moon. And if you're interested in learning more, Dark Sky International, I'll talk about them later. They've got a great page all about it and how you can get involved trying to tell the FCC, no, please, no, which, yeah, that's a whole thing. So I think it's become so noticeable, and it continues to get more noticeable, that finally some people are starting to recognize that light pollution is a conservation issue. And there's a great article in Scientific American from a few years ago all about this. And what I want to talk about today is what that looks like for insects, because if I say pesticides are a threat to insects, I think my talk would be very short. But light pollution can be a little bit more mysterious. It's complicated. There's a lot of different things to delve into, and I want to take us through that so we can have a more complete understanding. Yes. I love categories, so I'm going to talk about a couple of categories of impact. And they all have fancy names. And the first, and I would argue, well, I change my mind about this often, but I think maybe one of the most impactful, the biggest disruption of light pollution on insects has nothing to do with what you might be thinking of, which I'll get to later, but instead clocks, time, daily and seasonal clocks, phenology, nightly activity. So you and I, we are diurnal animals. We're active during the day. And if you stay up late scrolling on your phone or on your computer, it can be hard to sleep because that light gets into your brain and it tricks your brain into thinking that it's daytime. And for us, daytime means we should be awake. We also have different seasonal cycles that we're a little bit desynchronized because of our very artificial mode of living, but I bet a lot of us feel pretty tired in the winter, a little low energy. And a really good way to solve this, highly recommend, is with light therapy or a full spectrum lamp. You can get a very bright light that you look into or near for about 30 minutes each morning in the winter, and I really couldn't recommend it more. It gives you so much energy, zest for life, and it really makes those winter days seem not that bad. And so in this way, the light is tricking our brain into thinking that it's summer, right? So that's artificial light that's doing that to us. Lots of other animals are diurnal. Lots of insects are diurnal. And artificial light should affect diurnal insects the same way. So while I'm going to talk about nocturnal insects primarily today, I think it's worth remembering that just the way that human health impacts of artificial light should be essentially the same as impacts of artificial light on diurnal insects like bees, like butterflies. And there's a lot to get into there in terms of their effects on activity and development. But I'm going to do an example, a moth example, that's a little bit closer to home for me, because moths are interesting, and other nocturnal insects are interesting because everything's switched. So for them, added light means it's like day, daytime means they should be asleep. And so an insect that emerges at a certain time of night to visit a flower, if it becomes active and yet there's a street light in the environment, there's all this added light, well, it might think to itself, okay, not time yet, and go back to bed. And either its activity could be delayed, or if that light never turns off, it might just not be be inactive for the whole evening, if not longer. And I think over the course of the day and a night, there's definitely some changes that you might see, but the really crucial impact has to do with phenology, with diapause, because we'll get to that. I'll use my words. Because a lot of insects are attuned to day length in deciding when to enter diapause. So we talked a little bit earlier about how in the spring, warm temperatures, insects come out when it gets warm. In the fall, an insect can't wait until it gets cold to go into diapause because by then it will be too late. It needs to be able to predict when winter is coming. And the way that it predicts that is by looking for when the days get shorter and shorter and shorter. And so if you have an artificial light that makes the days seem longer than they would otherwise be, you can get something like that has been observed in the horse chestnut leaf miner, which inside it's a moth that lives inside the two halves of a horse chestnut tree leaf. And in this study that I'm citing here, when these horse chestnuts and their leaf miners were grown in a greenhouse under street lighting conditions, that generation skipped diapause 50% of the time. Half of them never entered diapause, but continued with direct development, despite the fact that the temperatures were getting colder and colder and colder. And if they skip diapause, that means they're not prepared for the winter, and entire populations, or half of populations, can be annihilated in this way, right? And so there's a lot more to be learned there, but I think it's quite a big one, especially here in Rhode Island when the winters are so inhospitable. It's definitely something to be aware of. And they also found, it's an interesting study because this took place in Germany, and they also did some urban and rural sites out in nature, wild horse chestnut trees, and found a similar sort of pattern where the moths were much more active much later than they should be under artificial light. So that's a big one. But it's often not the one that people think of first, until now, hopefully. What most people think of first when talking about how light pollution affects insects has to do with this behavior, this very odd behavior we call flight to light, or fatal attraction, positive phototaxis, many other names. And it looks something like this, where moths and other insects will spend entire evenings circling light sources, smashing into them, or sitting underneath them stunned, instead of, foraging, reproducing, ovipositing, etc. And this behavior is highly detrimental. They often end up predated by insectivores that come to these lights to feed, or they die in other ways. So on the left here is an image my friend Brett shared with me of a bunch of moths flying to a floodlight at I think it's next to a roller coaster. And all the moths are landing on the floodlight, and it's so hot that they're bursting into flames. The moth to a flame is sort of the older version of this, right? And you might see insects enter campfires in certain areas, all sorts of things, candles. And then on the top right, this is Las Vegas during a locust swarm event where you can see, all of these locusts have come into the city, and they are just gathering around these light sources, flying endlessly. Bottom right is a mayfly swarm, similar kind of thing. Aquatic insects are especially susceptible to this kind of behavior. And you can see, it's just incredible biomass, incredible abundance, tons and tons of insects, and almost all of these insects are not producing a next generation, right? This is not a hospitable habitat for them. This is a very detrimental behavior. So not great. And this is one form of a larger problem, which I would refer to as spatial disorientation. So just as light confuses an insect's sense of where it is in time, it thinks that it's day instead of night, summer instead of winter. It also confuses an insect's sense of where it is in space, because most nocturnal insects use some form of natural light cues to navigate their environment. That might be light from the stars, light from the moon, or light from the sky. And light pollution interferes with that. This has been best studied in the dung beetle, the humble dung beetle, which is capable of incredible navigation. So for those of you who don't know, dung beetles, they lay their eggs in these balls of dung, and it's imperative once they make a ball of dung that they roll it away from the source as fast as possible so that nobody else gets to it. And the way to do that is to go in a straight line. And the way that these beetles decide how to go in a straight line is before taking off, they'll climb on top of the ball of dung, look up into the sky, do a little circle, and then using celestial light sources like the Milky Way as a cue, as a landmark, they will keep that in mind as they move straight, sort of navigating by the stars. And if they are in a beautiful, pristine, dark sky area, that works very well. If there's a city on the horizon creating this glow of sky glow, they'll exhibit what's called beaconing, which is essentially flight to light, movement towards the light source. And if there's no direct source of light, but the stars are generally obscured, they exhibit disorientation. They find it impossible to go in a straight line, the same way that you or I would if we closed our eyes and tried to walk straight. It's just very difficult. So by obscuring the stars, light pollution can really interfere with navigation in insects. And not to belabor the point too much, but navigation is very important. It's very important to get where you need to go, just like it's important to do what you need to do when you need to do it. Where things happen and when things happen, these are crucial for insects, and light pollution can interfere with both. Okay, and the final thing I would want to talk about, I feel like, is the least commonly discussed of these four different impacts. We don't know as much about it, but to me it's extremely interesting. Allow me to describe, and perhaps you will agree. So this is a foxglove flower. This is what it looks like to us during the day in sunlight. Beautiful. This is what it looks like in the eyes of an elephant hawk moth at night, lit up by the moon. So it's a false color image. They have UV photoreceptors. We don't, but that's kind of what it would look like. Here's what it looks like to them under a cool white LED, and here's what it looks like under an amber orangey red LED. So, not to flatter myself, I think, we're pretty smart, and we know that these are different flowers, right? But a lot of insects are not as capable of this level of understanding, and for them, artificial light creates this unnatural illumination that can make it very difficult for them to recognize objects in their environment, resources that they need, like others of their species, floral resources, predators, you name it. And I think this surely is only becoming more of an issue given the proliferation in recent years of extremely tacky LEDs. So this is underbridge lighting is an enemy of mine. I think it looks bad, but also it creates such a bizarre impact on the environment. So here, this is grass, right? Can you imagine as a grass-feeding insect knowing that that's grass? I mean, it just looks nothing like it. And then this is an especially big issue for my favorite group of insects, the fireflies, which are incredibly visual creatures. And for them, our lights make it very, very hard for them to see each other's lights, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Okay, so here are the categories. One last time, feel free to ask questions about any of these after, but I will continue. Many different ways in which light pollution affects insects. The natural next question is, what can we do about it? And I love this stock image. This is some people stargazing, but it's extremely well illuminated. And also the sky is extremely light polluted. This is not what it should look like, for those of you who don't know. Another thing I love to make fun of, my alma mater, so Tufts University used to have this LED in the, it was near the visitor, the police area. Why am I forgetting the name? Anyway, in the garage. It was in a garage. And when you went into the garage, it was by far the brightest thing in the environment. It made it impossible to see, totally unshielded, super bright, right into your eyeballs. I'm like, one of the worst lights I've ever seen. And underneath it was this little plaque talking about how this is sustainable lighting, and that Tufts was very proud because this was the first LED installation in Massachusetts. And for decades now, LEDs have had this reputation of being very sustainable because they're energy efficient. And that's great, and I like LEDs, and I think they are sustainable in that way, and that it's good to advance our technology and make our lights more energy efficient. But this is not in itself sustainable. There has to be another metric we can use. And so what we have now are sort of dark sky friendly lighting guidelines. So this is lighting that's sustainable in terms of its impacts on the night sky, which is often used as a proxy for light pollution, although it's not quite the same thing. But Dark Sky International is a nonprofit. It was founded in the 80s, aimed at regulating light pollution. It was founded by astronomers. Most members are astronomers, but not all of them. And so it has a very astronomical focus. And they put forth these recommendations, which are all about limiting light in some way. So light should be shielded so that it's pointed down at the ground. It should be shifted in color to warmer wavelengths like yellow and amber, because for two reasons, three technically. One is that blue light goes up into the sky and bounces around more, so it creates more of that sky glow we were talking about. The other is that blue light has more human health impacts in terms of clocks. So blue light is especially bad for confusing our circadian rhythm. And that's generally true across species, but not always. And then the third reason is that blue light is less environmentally or ecologically friendly. It has fewer ecological impacts, which we will discuss presently, because that's sort of always been said, but not tested as much. And then these lights should be dimmed and then put on automated controls of some sort to turn them off, usually timers that turn them off after a certain time of night when people are less likely to be around. So I want to talk about color. Well, I want to talk about all of these, but I'm going to focus on color because it's been the focus of the field for a long time. And I want to talk about effects of different colors on a very charismatic insect, unfortunately not found in Rhode Island, but it's not all that far away. Pennsylvania is the closest population. The synchronous firefly, Photinus carolinus, flashes all in a group like this, about 6 to 8 times, maybe 10, and then it goes dark. There's a period of darkness, and then the synchrony starts back up again. So it's incredible behavior. Synchronous fireflies, they're most famous for being found in Tennessee, North Carolina area, but western Pennsylvania also has some populations. And many of these areas host events, ecotourism events that attract people from all around the globe to these remote areas in order to view these displays. You can see one in the background there, which are truly stunning. I mean, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's magical, but it also poses this interesting issue because these events will happen in the middle of the woods where it's very dark, as you can tell. And visitors need some sort of light in order to navigate their way around. It's a public safety issue. And yet the light that they bring is in conflict with the insects that they've come to see, which need natural darkness. And for a long time, people in the field have had this idea that there might be this middle ground solution, a sustainable lighting solution, or what we might call firefly-friendly lighting. And this is light that is of a color that fireflies don't see very well or don't react to. The only problem is that we can never decide what that color was. So blue was an option for a long time. Sorry about that. Red, another common option, and then more recently, amber, because of Dark Sky International and all of these other groups, has become popular as the sort of generally ecologically friendly lighting solution. So to test the effects of these different colors, some time ago, myself and a couple of research assistants performed a study on the grounds of the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival, where we set up a transect along this forest edge, and we put 4 different lights at intervals. One of them was not lit, that's the dark control. So it was red, amber, blue, and a dark control. And then we would randomize them each night. And each night, we would walk along these transects and count all the flashes that we saw. We also used sticky traps to sample the other insects that were attracted to these lights to look at the impacts of the colors on the general insect community. And so here on the x-axis, I'm showing one of those transects as you sort of go towards the forest and away from the forest. And we would walk these for about 2 hours each night from 10 p.m. to midnight. And in general, we would see a lot of flashes right next to the woods, which is where this species likes to hang out. And then as we went out into the field, in darkness, absent any light whatsoever, the population just sort of tailed off a little bit. When we put a bright amber street light, floodlight, right in the middle, the display completely collapsed. You still had some flashes here near the woods, but again, nothing here. And then our red and blue light did the same thing, but to a lesser extent. And then when we looked at how many insects these different colors of light caught, we did get about 50 very unlucky insects at our dark treatments. They just flew into the sticky trap. They just flew into it. Our blue light attracted a lot more insects. So did our amber light. And then so did our red light, although not as many as the other two colors. So looking at this, my takeaway is that all light is not great for fireflies. If you had to pick a color, probably red is the best. Red and blue are about the same for fireflies, but red is better than blue when it comes to the general insect community. And then of the three, by far the worst is amber. And put a pin in that one. But I want to zoom out a little bit because I didn't mention why these fireflies are flashing in the first place. What we've just looked at are the displays of a bunch of flying male fireflies. Sorry. Is anybody interested in the family composition of the? Talk to me after. It was mostly flies and gnats, and I think that explains the large attraction to amber. A lot of these species are more attracted to yellow. Anyway, a little inside baseball. So this is some video of some male fireflies. There's one here. I'll play it twice. It's an individual. So when we go out in the field and we see firefly displays, what we're looking at are male fireflies flying around emitting these advertisements. And they're looking for responses from females that are on the ground. And if a female flashes back, they enter what's called a courtship dialogue, and the two will exchange flashes until they eventually find each other. It's kind of rare to see videos of the dialogue itself, so I have some here, although they're not spectacular. You're about to see a male and a female Phytinus marginalis. In this species, they both do a single flash, but you can see a sort of call and response, where the male starts, the female answers, and then he's coming closer and closer. He flashes again. She didn't like that one. I don't know why. But that one worked, and that's how they find each other in the dark. And we developed this method of tracking fireflies in the field using fluorescent powder. What you're seeing here is a female that we marked. She's mating with a male here. And then there's another male that's sort of just seeing if he can maybe get in on that in some way. And so he kind of crawls around. And one thing that they'll do, it's very cute, is the males will climb on top and they'll put their lantern right on her eyes and just flash like right. No luck for him. If you're really lucky in the field, you'll see what we call a triple stack. So here on the bottom, it's really hard to see. There is a female. There's a male on top of her, a male on top of him, and a male on top of that male. All of them sort of wrestling, trying to make some eggs. So what I'm trying to get at is this courtship dialogue is very important. The males aren't the ones who decide what happens to the next generation, right? What the females are doing is what really matters, because they're the ones who lay the eggs. And long story short, we've done a lot of trials in the laboratory looking at how different colors of light affect this dialogue. And what we see is that this was a different species, Phytinus obscurellus. We saw them flash about 10 times a minute in darkness. And in darkness, females respond almost every time. And then under a bunch of different colors and brightnesses of light, we saw the males flash about half as much. But crucially, the females went almost completely dark. And so what we're seeing, I believe, is here there's a difference between a male that's getting a lot of encouragement and a male that isn't really hearing anything back. He's sort of half-heartedly looking around trying to find someone. So that's about a 50% drop. But here's the real issue. If the females don't flash back, they have no other way of finding each other. It's not only sort of a ritualistic precursor to mating, it's also very practically a necessary precursor to mating because they can't find each other in any other way. So what this means, my takeaway, two things. One is if we go out into an area with a lot of lights and we see this amount of flashing, we might not think it's that bad until 1 or 2 years later we come back and that population has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk because of the effect on the females. The other thing you might notice is that of the different colors, dim red and dim blue, not as impactful, but amber is by far the most disruptive, and to the point that we never saw a single female flash under an amber light. So wouldn't it be unfortunate if amber lights were only becoming more popular as dark sky friendly, sustainable lighting? We've spent a lot of time in my field trying to find a color of light that, sort of the silver bullet, that has no ecological impacts, that only humans can see. But unfortunately, we're animals, so are a lot of other species, and there's a lot of overlap. I think for me, color has become a huge distraction away from more universally effective mitigation methods. And I think that we are attracted to lights like these, but much to our detriment. It's sort of metaphorical, I think. So some time ago, I worked with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation to write a set of firefly-friendly lighting guidelines. And you can Google it, but instead, keep listening, because I stand by these, but the order in which I would word things has changed slightly based on some recent thoughts and realization and development in the field. So they're all effective, but I'm going to sort of set out the priority in a different way. And to do that, I'm going to take us back to our dark sky friendly lighting guidelines, which I walked you through. I want to emphasize these were written by astronomers, largely for astronomers, although the ecologists are always sort of tangentially involved in the process. But sometimes you see things where the difference between the two groups becomes really obvious, such as, I saw this the other day, and I genuinely laughed. I thought it was a joke. This is a successful before and after of a sustainable lighting redesign. So in this case, the problem that's been fixed is the glare and the color. And what's happened instead is you've created a more uniform illumination, this bright amber illumination. Very little of that light is going up into the sky, but the fireflies, the moths, and everybody else, they live down here. So seeing things like this made me start to think about the degree to which our responsible outdoor lighting principles really work for insects and not just stars. And so with my last few minutes today, I want to take you through these 5 recommendations and talk about what I think, how I think they might work or not work for insects. Much of this is based on literature. Some, I'll try to make that clear, some is based on opinion. And if you want to hear more about it, if you visit my website, we wrote a paper on this recently called Current Evidence in Support of Insect-Friendly Lighting Practices, which has got all my thoughts, and I'd be happy to send anybody the link if they were curious. But I'm going to start from the bottom and go up. So back to color. Repeatedly, we are told we should use warm color lights. Amber is great, amber is environmentally friendly, and warm white is better than cool white. And it is true that insects are more attracted to short wavelengths like UV. Remember this photo? So UV is very cold, it's very close to blue, and insects are extremely attracted to it, much more than a red light. A lot of insects don't see red at all or see it very poorly. And so if you had to choose between a UV light and a red light would be better, less bad for sure. But usually that's not the choice that we're making, right? Usually we're deciding between lights of different color temperature along this gradient from cool white to warm white. And usually what we're talking about when thinking about local policy or general recommendations or what we ask people to do in their backyards is making something in this range. And there is an emerging body of evidence, quite a few papers at this point, showing that within this range, the color of light doesn't make much difference at all in terms of how many insects arrive at a light. And I think we can sort of intuitively understand this because a lot of amber lights are still hugely attractive to insects. So this is another mayfly swarm. These insects are attracted to these lights over a bridge. They're supposed to be laying eggs in the water underneath the bridge, so this is not ideal. And a moth to a flame, same thing. Flames are orange, and yet they're still hugely impactful. Okay, well, another option is the use of timers that turn the lights off after a certain period of evening when insects are likely to have gone to bed. This is an X-rated image, sorry, everyone. So, I've gone on and on about how most insects are nocturnal. What I mean by that, what effectively this means is most insects are active after the sun sets, but it does get pretty cold. And so a lot of nocturnal insects are focused in those few hours right after sunset. Moths are a bit of an exception. They will emerge later in the evening. But in general, insects tend to be active earlier in the evening when a timer like this that was meant to regulate light and turn it off past a certain hour when humans have gone to bed, by that point, a lot of insects might have gone to bed as well. And my research fellow, Amina somewhere, will be giving a talk about this later this afternoon, so stay tuned for that. But before we did that study, sort of going into it, I wasn't fully convinced that timers would be all that useful, but more on that in a bit. Okay, well, then we have dimming. Lights should be made dim. And I think it can't hurt to make a light dimmer, but we have to remember that nocturnal insects have eyes that are thousands of times more sensitive than our own. So a dim light has to be bright enough for humans to use, at which point it's probably too bright for most insects. Fireflies, I think, are an exception because there's a relationship between how bright a light is and how bright a firefly is. And so a street light that's dimmer than a firefly is probably better for the firefly. But the literature around insect attraction to light has never really shown a substantial effect of dimming. You just can't get it dim enough, essentially. Well, that leaves us with shielding that directs light down at the ground. And I was very skeptical of this for a long time because the ground is where the insects live. However, some recent innovations in shielding have been extremely promising. So this is a study in Germany. This is a before and after of this public park where these lights, you can see, this is a real photo, and then here's a false color image that shows sort of quantified measurements of where the light is in the habitat. And these researchers installed shielding that pointed the light down only at the path and really cut it off beyond the border of the path. So you can see very little light spilling out into the rest of the environment. And this made an enormous difference in the number of insects that these lights attracted, much of which are not coming from the path, but coming from the natural areas around the path. And we've since done something similar, looking at different amounts of shielding in Southwest Texas and their impacts on insect attraction, and we found the exact same thing, that if you can cut out a lot of that glare, you'll reduce the number of insects that your light attracts enormously. Hugely effective. And what's nice about this is it's also extremely inexpensive. I mean, shielding, homemade shielding, right? You don't need to buy a new light in order to make your light a lot better. There's no reason for a light to be on a lawn instead of a path, and so forth. And then the last recommendation is that lights should only be used if they are needed. A light should not be present. Well, I'll try to get the wording. They word it much better. Yes. Use light only if it is needed. All light should have a clear purpose. And so if you turn off a light that doesn't have a purpose, that's what it looks like. It's great. That's the control scenario. Insects love it. No comment. I think this is perfect, and that's really, if we could eliminate lights that weren't being actively used, that's 99.9% of the problem. If you wander around at night and think about all the lights you see and how many of them are being used by a person, it's extremely small percentage. This is an image of Nantucket. So Nantucket, I want to sort of shout out the Dark Sky Massachusetts chapter. So Dark Sky International, it's a global organization, but they have local chapters. The Massachusetts chapter, I think maybe somebody who knows more about this than me can jump in at some point. But we used to have a New England chapter, but then it's split perhaps. We have a Massachusetts chapter. It's quite good. And the folks in different townships around Massachusetts have been really active in their local communities, getting ordinances and small policy changes, and working with the lighting companies. And Nantucket is a great success story where there's been a lot of sort of grassroots activism around keeping the night sky dark, and it's quite beautiful out there, or so I hear. I haven't gone yet, maybe someday. But to conclude, so here are my current recommendations, same as the Firefly-friendly lighting guidelines if you look them up, but they're in a slightly different order now. Number one is always going to be to remove lights that aren't being used, and I think the best way that we can do this is through motion activators, because an insect can't set off a motion activator and then the light is on when people are there and it's not on when people are not. Of those lights, when they're on, yes, they should be on motion activators. And then they should also be confined to the path instead of the verge, right? There's no reason for there's no reason to put a light on a tree. Up tree lighting, don't get me started. So it should be going to a place that is useful and then kept as dim as possible with the understanding that it's never going to be dim enough. And then timers are probably not harmful, although I don't want to overestimate how beneficial they could be. And I'm not even putting color up here because I'm tired of talking about it. I think it's just complicated. It's definitely the most complicated, the least universally effective, and the biggest distraction from these other methods. So with that, I want to thank some funding sources as well as both Xerces and Dark Sky International, not funding sources, but they're both wonderful groups that do amazing work. And with that, I have a few minutes, I think, for questions. But also, just to go off of this beautiful picture, just if anybody also has questions afterwards, that's my contact information. Yes?
So I've tried talking to people about turning off the dark lights, and I don't get very far. And so is there some great video that's this talk or something that you can point to and share with people?
Absolutely. So I do have some recordings of talks. If you email me, I could send you one. I tend to recommend that people go to the Dark Sky International website. They have a lot of outreach materials and guidelines on how you might talk to your neighbors. I'm not an expert. I'm certainly not an expert in talking to my neighbors. But I do think that it can be quite sensitive. People don't want to be told that they're doing something wrong, and there's a big sense of it's my house, it's my right to light it the way that I want. And I think going in with an attitude of like compassion and like mutual understanding and like even sort of humility, right? Like, oh, this thing I just learned, like. Did you know that like the night sky around here is like, it could be like so beautiful if only blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think it's definitely a sensitive issue, but I think what's nice about it is it's not usually a political issue. So there's yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a sense for the magnitude of like pesticides versus light pollution on magnitude of the effect of those two things on fireflies in general?
That's a great question. I think we don't have even a good sense of firefly population trends. Yeah. We're so far out from that. Yeah. I think my impression is that a lot of the pesticides that people use for turf pests, for ground-dwelling beetles, fireflies are ground-dwelling beetles. I didn't talk about this, but they're subterranean as larvae. They're also carnivores. Fascinating. Yeah, so they're not pollinators. I should have clarified. So I think that's probably having a huge impact, but I couldn't tell you. Yeah.
Going back to that slide that you showed of the painting of Boston at twilight, it got me thinking about the light sources that have historically been used, and you've done a great job of including a lot of different factors, lighting sources. But I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what the stability of the light does for how that affects the insect, because these are flames in this picture, in this painting, that would be flickering, and I'm wondering if that makes a difference than a stable LED light.
Interesting. So you're kind of getting at the topic of flicker, which technically a lot of LEDs aren't stable. They're flickering too fast for us to see, but much dimming happens by messing with the flicker frequency. It's called something else that is smarter than what I just said, but and there is a lot of evidence that diurnal insects are really sensitive to that. They can see flickers that we can't, and so there's some research into whether LEDs with different flickering frequencies would have a bigger or less impact. For nocturnal insects, I think this is less likely to be an issue because it's really important for them to see as much light as possible, and one way that they do that is what's called temporal summation, where they just kind of, it's like leaving your camera shutter open for longer, so they see more slowly. And so I don't really know that level of flicker would make a difference. Another thing to think about, though, is also heat. LEDs are very cold. A lot of older lights are very hot. And I think that might be one reason why a lot of mothers prefer older lighting types and not LEDs. Like, I wonder if the heat does something to the insects that approach that makes them stick around for longer. There's a lot to go into there in answer to your question. Yeah. Yes.
So I was thinking about, I think it was one of your earlier photos of lights under a bridge.
Yes.
And I was wondering, was that for safety purposes, or was that an attractive display?
That's aesthetic lighting. Under bridge lighting is aesthetic lighting.
Okay, so what I was thinking is I have noticed a lot of these light displays. I've been to one around Christmas time, and of course that's not going to impact insects much. But I was wondering if there was a way to try to encourage people to do light displays, for an evening or, a couple of days, and not have something up long term, but make it an event, so that, because it is to some, an art form.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be all night or,
100%. I think I'm not coming for anybody's string lights. We'll never win the battle of ideas that way. Absolutely not. But
thinking, the same idea as only having lights on when people are there. Just target your.
Yes. A lot of people, I'm going to throw this person under the bus again. Nobody knows where this house is except me. So the right next to it, right out of frame, there is a tree that has Christmas lights on it all year round, and it has for years. And it's like charming when you get out to the field at like 8 p.m. and by 10 p.m. it is by far the brightest object in the environment. And nobody is looking at those lights except for me and the Fireflies, right, and the team. So I think people do decorative lighting. I love that. That's very fun, but they just forget about it. And yeah, if we could encourage more discrete celebrations and for people to be more thoughtful, I think that's very nice. I would love that. Yeah.
Glad you're on that picture, because I've been trying to think about that one slide you had when you did your experiment in the field, and there's a curve that showed distance away from the edge of the forest.
Yeah.
So I live on the edge of a forest. It's a conservation land forest. I think I have a really excellent firefighting population. I love that period of the year.
Yeah.
But I am concerned about the lighting from my house like that.
Yeah.
So what can we do? Should I not have lights in the house?
Curtains. I think, no, I mean, seriously though, I say this all the time. Do I close my curtains like every night? I think what we really need is an advance in curtain technology that closes them automatically. Nobody wants to leave their curtains open. It just curtains on timers, and they close. Yeah, that's the big one. I think most lighting, and like, yeah, also Alewife Brook, if we look at it, they just need curtains. This is green architecture, by the way. You can tell it's green because it's glass and it's full of LEDs. This is like a common problem we have. Yeah.
With that house, with the light, since then, did you succeed? Did you convince them?
I haven't talked to them. See previous. My job is to tell you to talk to your neighbors. We all have different skills. One more? Oh, sorry.
Is there a notice between more industrial lighting towards this affecting? Since I do a lot of work with offshore stuff, so you have a ship that's offshore, it's a city.
Yeah.
Does that bring stuff from the shore towards it?
The fish for sure.
Well, fish we know.
Yeah.
I'm saying insects.
Insects, I think it would depend on how close it was to the shore. There's not, well, I don't know of many insects that are,
No.
well, they're none in the ocean, right?
It's attracted, that it could be an attraction.
Yeah,
Towards it.
of like powerfully flying insects.
It's more so with industrial lighting towards more of a household.
It tends to be a lot brighter and it tends to be pretty blue. I would love to go out on one of these ships and like look, so.
There was one more question in the very back there.
I've noticed that at URI, a lot of the buildings, like especially the engineering building, is like completely lit in the middle of the night when no one's there.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, maybe there's something like we could do about that, and send a message to them and see if there's anything we can do.
Absolutely. I think sometimes there's this reluctance to install timers because it's an added expense. I was sort of getting at this earlier. Sometimes it's cheaper to leave the lights on, but if you can appeal to other things such as sustainability, I think absolutely. There's also some amount of, I know in a lot of commercial areas, folks feel like having lit windows is an advertisement, and and hopefully like the sustainability message can get to those people, because yeah, certainly that light isn't benefiting anybody, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.